and welcome everybody to the weird world of knowing. We are back again with a beautiful episode. Yes, beautiful is here again with the wonderful, fabulous Peter Merry. I am Rachel Earing, your host for today. And Peter Merry is a very, very special guest and one I'm extremely excited about having on board, because it is because of Peter that the weird world of knowing is actually happening. Everything that he put together when I went to this science and consciousness event last year, and the whole concept, the Wyrd Experience, the science and the consciousness that was all put together resonated so deeply with my soul and my own weird experiences and the therapy business that I do, that I was basically compelled to create a podcast, of which I am really not a podcast host. I've never done this before. It's all new to me. So I'm having so much fun doing this and reconnecting with Peter and everybody else from Broughton Hall, who I met last year. But I'm having an absolute ball and I hope you're enjoying it too. So Peter, hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be
so
here.
Excited to have you here. So let me just give a little bit of background to the listeners of who Peter Merry is. So Peter Merry has founded Ubiquity University, and he helps lead social enterprises and supports other leaders and organisations develop new philosophies. With what he's seeing through the books that he writes, his talks and courses, and brings about this balance of life as much as possible to family, friends and his work colleagues, which he does in the really most magical way. But first of all, Peter, let's just go back to, obviously the Ubiquity University is very much part, I think, of what you put together for the Science and Consciousness event last year at Broughton Hall. Just tell us a little bit about Ubiquity before we move on, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah. So Ubiquity University emerged actually out of something that originally existed based in California called Wisdom University. And it was a graduate school focused on inspiration from the wisdom traditions and how they inform our actions today in the world. And then in around 2012, with a lot of the online learning developing, we felt there was a chance to take that kind of approach to a larger scale. And that's what gave birth to Ubiquity, which I co-founded with a number of other people about 10 years ago now. And we designed a kind of integral approach to learning where students get 1/3 of their credits for knowledge-based learning, 1/3 for personal development, what we call self-mastery, and 1/3 for an impact project. So it's a real project that they're doing on the ground, trying to make a difference in the world. And it's been a combination of online with some in person and some blended, but really focused on, what do we really need to develop to be able to make a positive contribution to the world today. Mm. So that's in a little nutshell, a bit about Ubiquity. Yeah.
And when you look at Ubiquity University, and I really do advise you to go and have a look at Ubiquity, for me it encompasses the move forward, how we are actually going to move forward with all our wisdom that we have now and how we integrate it. I think you've explained that beautifully, but for someone like me who doesn't have I don't have a degree, I've never wanted to go to university. There's not been anything. I didn't want to be a doctor or a nurse or anything mechanical. Certainly loved science, but actually could never grasp the mathematics behind it. And so that led me on a very different path, and I ended up in television, sort of worked my way and sort of from an apprentice type level through my journey of life. But when I looked at Ubiquity, it's the one place that I actually got excited and thought, oh, I'd really like to do a degree, because there's a degree in wisdom. And that sang to my soul. And when you look into it, please go and have a look at it, everyone, because when you have a look around the university site, you're going to be blown away if, like me, you are into consciousness and science. Well, you obviously will be, because you're here listening to us. So without further ado, Peter, explain to us how the event, Science and Consciousness event, the Wyrd Experience, came about at Broughton.
Well, I've been kind of exploring for a number of years the world of energy and information. In fact, my whole PhD that I did at Ubiquity's Wisdom School was focused on exploring this question of how do we understand and make sense of essentially the invisible dimensions of reality that our science currently tends to ignore simply because we can't see it with our eyes, and we can't measure it with our normal instruments. And as part of that exploration, I came across work that they had been doing at Princeton University for 28 years. In fact, I think I came across it in Lynne McTaggart's book, The Field, first. And what had happened is that at the engineering school at Princeton, they'd been seeing data that was suggesting that fighter pilots in their cockpits, when they started to get stressed, were influencing the instruments on the dashboards. So this was obviously an important data point, because the readouts of those instruments were particularly important. And if they weren't as objective as everybody thought they were, because they were influenced by the inner state of the pilot, then they needed to research what that meant. And so they spent 28 years basically looking at how the inner state of the human affects what would otherwise be neutral or random events around us. And they did that with in a number of different ways, from mechanical experiments of this massive machine on the wall that drops 9,000 black marbles through a system that would normally give you a kind of standard deviation curve at the bottom, and then people would sit in front of it and just try to influence more balls to fall to the left or the right. And they were finding that people could do this with significant statistical impact, including, you didn't have to be a psychic or something to do it. You know, kids would anybody could sit down and influence, basically. And then they started to develop more digital ways of assessing how people's mind could influence the world around them. And they developed something which became called a random event generator, or random number generator, which is really a fast coin flipper. It flips kind of lots of zeros and ones very fast. So you would, if it was random, you just get 50% of each. And through different interfaces, what they were basically doing is have people try to influence the number of ones or the numbers of zeros. So it was be less, there'd be more structure in the data, the structure that you wouldn't expect if it was just being random. And over all of those years, they found very significant data that was showing that people were making small but consistently small impacts on this data, which was showing really beyond statistical doubt that human consciousness and intention was affecting the world around us, regardless of our physical proximity to the device. So from the other side of the world didn't make any difference. And interestingly enough, outside of time. So it didn't have to be before the event. And they also explored a lot of the remote perception work. So looking at how from a distance you could send information to other people. So for example, they would have somebody on one side of the Atlantic waiting to receive information, and they would know the name of the person who was on the other side of the Atlantic about to look at something. They didn't know where they were or what they were going to look at. And this person would go and look at this, probably a building or a particular landscape or something, and they would try to send that back to the person on the other side of the Atlantic. And they did that with great success, but again, also outside of time. So for example, people would send them back information, or the person would receive the information, try to pick it up before the person had actually gone to the location or even known what location they were going to be looking at. So this was all sorts of data that was showing these scientists, and really, Robert Jahn, who was the engineering professor, was very skeptical at the beginning, and was trained in classically, but he's a real scientist, and real scientists, if they see data that challenges their worldview, will start to question their worldview and the theory and everything that exists. So this is what he did together with Brenda Dunne, who managed the lab there. over these 28 years, and really it was nearly 1 in a billion chance that what they found was actually chance. So from when I came across that, I was like, okay, good. So we don't need to prove anymore that human intention in our inner state affects the world around us, that we're entangled, really, that there's not these fixed boundaries that we think there are. We can just assume that now.
Yeah.
That's been proven. Whether people want to believe it or not, that's up to them. But if you follow, real scientific rigor, and they can show this data, then, that's been proven. So then the question becomes, what are the implications? So anyway, so I was, the lab closed in 2007, 2008. And at some point after that, they had set up a company to produce these little random event generators for the public to buy, as well as mind lamps, which were lamps which change color that you could influence with your mind. And anyway, so I heard about this, and I got hold of some of the lamps, but also the random event generators and the software, and would take them to events and just leave them at events. And you would notice how at the moments during events where the group became particularly coherent, more structure came into the random data. So somehow the experience that a group was having was influencing this field of information. Yeah. And so I sent some of that to Brenda, and and she got back to me. So we'd been having some email exchange. We ended up talking, and at some point she said, I've got all of this equipment still in storage, and it's costing us a fortune. And, could you think of anything to do with it?
Fantastic.
I had just got to know Roger and Paris at Broughton. And I was just, well, maybe let me see if they'd be interested in, hosting all of this equipment in a space where people could just come in and directly experience the interconnectedness, essentially, of their minds with the rest of the world around them. And Roger felt like it was a good thing to do, and so that's how we ended up getting the equipment and everything to Broughton. And thought, well, it would be good to bring some people together. Now we've got all this equipment and this great resource library there to experience it and to explore, what's next in this whole domain of research. And so that's what gave birth to the Science and Consciousness event in 2021, which Brenda came over to, and Lynne McTaggart, who had visited the lab at Princeton, came and joined us. And so it was a really great, like you say, a really good combination of the science, but also the experience, and trying to ground our experience in, not a limited understanding, but at least being able to show that there's something, behind it that we can talk about, give it a language, as it were. So yeah, so that is, at least we're going to do it again this year anyway, 2022. So whether it'll keep going, we'll see, but it feels like it might.
Oh, I think it definitely feels like it might. I think it's once you've been and you've experienced it, and that combination of science and consciousness that you managed to attain last year was just sublime. It actually, and I think the timing of it as well, and absolutely the environment, because Broughton really has peaceful, real deep peaceful soul, and they've renovated it in such a authentic way that when you actually just even reach Broughton itself, your whole senses just start to fall into place just by being in Broughton. The energy there is just beautiful. But then to go into the room where you are mixing with physicists and people like Brenda and yourself, and for somebody like myself, who's an energy worker, who, we're constantly called weird, we're constantly called witches, we get called all sorts of things, because it's very, very difficult to explain this invisible field that captures all this information, that helps people to feel better once they tap into it and release their angst, really. And once you start to put all of that angst into that field, it just seems to melt away, just like when you're at Broughton, just being in nature, it just all seems to melt away. Obviously there's help there from the energy therapists, workers, as we do this work, to keep people safe, to keep buildings safe, because I know that's what you also work on. But for people like myself to be in that environment, that it's not a natural environment for us to go in and be able to, you know, talk to scientists who are discovering, you know, using all this equipment. It was like an absolute breath of fresh air that actually the work that we do is being validated. There's somewhere for it to, somewhere somebody's validating these fields, that gives us the figures, gives us the quantifiable fact that things work, that things are absolutely influenced by intention. And of course, we did lots of experiments while we were there as well, which was beautiful. The remote viewing, which I really enjoy, because that's very much what I do as a as a therapist. You're tuning into that energy field, and you what you see, hear and feel is very much what you're feeding back, maybe to your clients or just to yourself through that session. But to do it in that environment felt really quite weird for me. It was really weird because to share that with other people who, again, were measuring this on because we did it in several ways as well, didn't we, Peter? There was a method where we had partners, and our partner went out. I was the one that went out into the forest, and I had a partner in the room, and we fed back what we were feeling, seeing, hearing, and they had to draw that out. And then there was a group session where they went as a group out into the forest again, but then they were given certain pictures, images, weren't they, to think about and decide which one they were going to send back to the group. And that again was really interesting, with the different feedback. Now I could sort of understand all the different feedback, because personally, when I get feedback, it's usually very emotional. It's the emotional side that I pick up on. It's the energy side. It's that releasing of all sorts of things, and then the colours and shapes. But for other people, of course, it's their first time in doing this, and they were feeling and hearing things and seeing things that they'd never really encountered before. So you were drawing all sorts of things on this postboard. What were your thoughts from that feedback for that session?
From the remote perceptions? You know, at one level, we're all surprised when it happens, but part of my sense is actually we should stop being surprised, you know, because, so that's why I've called the kind of subtitle for next year, Making Weird the Norm. Like, what does it mean if we actually just accept that this is the nature of reality? But yeah, I mean, there were, you know, the interesting, when we did it with the group, we actually had the people in the room try to pick up the information half an hour before the group had even selected the picture they were going to send back. And as you know, we got some quite significant hits in terms of people accurately describing the picture that was eventually chosen. So for a traditional kind of Newtonian scientist, this would be, you know, not incomprehensible. Like, not only that people are sending information through space with their intention and other people are picking it up, but they're doing it outside of linear time. Yeah. So it kind of challenges all of the foundational rules of Newtonian kind of rational scientific mindset, which, you know, it doesn't mean that a part of science is wrong. It just means it's partial. I mean, it's good at describing a certain dimension of reality, but it's not good at describing another dimension of reality. And we need to find a way for them to be able to sit alongside each other, rather than just reject it because it doesn't fit the way we understand the world. So yeah, that was really great. And it was, of course, you know, I was expecting it to work, but it's also nice when it actually does, because you're kind of, what happens if none of this works, you know?
Oh, it certainly worked. And I think, again, the real significant benefit for all of this, and the whole purpose of me actually doing this podcast is to help bring together these two worlds, where we have, you know, people who do healing, people who do distance healing, whether that be through Reiki or spiritual healing or through EFT tapping or whatever modality that may be. We know it works because we send and receive that information as we're working with people. We know what that feels like. We know what that looks like. We know what that sounds like. Now, some people can see things greater than others. Other people hear things. Other people feel things. Some people do all of that, don't they? But to make that normal, to be able to have people like you to come on and talk in this way so that you can actually articulate between the two worlds. I think that's where the gap is. That's where this huge gap is, of having people who can really articulate the science with the weird energy, which is the norm, the normal energy work that we do, and articulate it in a level that you're able to. And that is where the gift really lies, I think, right now. So thank you for giving us that gift. It's much appreciated. So what's next after the weird becomes the norm in later on this year, where there's another event at Broughton? What's actually next on the agenda?
Yeah, well, there's a few things developing in in this whole weird world, and one is obviously the next event that we're doing, which is 31st of October to 4th of November, I think, in Broughton. And well, one of the topics that's emerged has been this topic of dying, actually, in the process of dying, in some of the recent experiments that we've been doing with the random event generators, because really just a few weeks ago, they did a very first experiment where they had somebody who knew she was going to die, a very conscious woman, and was aware of all this experimentation and stuff, and said, well, let's try it out on me. And so we set up a random event generator that was connected to her, and not physically, and ran for 5 days around the period that she knew she was going to die. And she died meditating, actually. And then the moment it was, when they looked at the data after, it was completely flat kind of line all the way until the moment she died, and then there was this big peak in the field, and then it kind of flattened again. And so that was showing us that the act of dying can't just be a material event, because this thing that was essentially picking up events in the field was picked up a significant event at that moment. So something was going on in the information and energy fields at that time. And they're continuing now with research at a number of hospices in Scotland, and also at intensive care units in Spain, where we're going to have the random event generator actually in the rooms with the people, and just see what it picks up as they pass. And so
that's really powerful. That because I've had that experience of helping. I didn't know that's what was going to happen. I was helping somebody who knew she was having a miscarriage, and she'd asked me to send her some healing. And as I was sending her healing, what I experienced was obviously very different from what she was experiencing, because I experienced the transition of that young soul inside her actually going into the light. And it was the most beautiful gift that I could have ever been given to facilitate and help that process. But from that little fetus to end up walking to grew, and all I could see were the legs walking towards that light. Obviously I didn't go as far as that light, but I got the essence and the feeling of all that, and it really is the most blissful experience that I've ever had. And you can't really put it into words, but it fills you up so much that I overflow with literally tears of joy, of just bliss in a way, just rolling. So my face was literally wet through. And so I can understand that peak.
Yeah, I think most of us feel that something, it's more than just a physical thing, but we're constantly bombarded by science and a mind view that tells us it's not, and yet so we have this dissonance between what we intuitively feel and what the kind of experts and authorities are telling us. And so to be able to come from that scientific perspective and show actually that something else does happen, I think is going to be really great. And so we'll be bringing together some of the top researchers in that area to have a day focused on this whole dying research. Yeah, and then we'll kind of we'll see. We're certainly going to do the remote. It's another kind of round of the remote perception This time I want to record it better because we didn't get enough photos of like the things the different partners actually drew and things, so that we can tell that story a bit more. And then we're continuing to work on the Wyrd Experience. Maybe I should say just a little bit about why we call it Wyrd.
Oh, please do, yes.
Which is Wyrd with a Y, so W-Y-R-D. Comes from actually the work Brian Bates, who wrote a book called The Way of Wyrd. That is based on a document from over 1,000 years old, I think, in the British Library, that documents the journey of a young priest who was at one of the first monasteries in England, who was sent out by the abbot to find the pagans and find out, you know, what their wizards do. And of course, this wizard knew this person was coming and prepared the whole initiation process for them, so really gave them the kind of inside out experience. And this priest went back to the monastery and wrote down, you know, the whole experience, right, then everything that had happened. And a part of that was describing, you know, the word that they use to describe the web that connects everything is the web of Wyrd, so W-Y-R-D, that kind of anything that has synchronicity in it, anything that's about what goes on in those invisible spaces in between, they describe as Wyrd. And so you can see where how the word got distorted over time to be something that's strange. But we felt that was the nice thing about it, is that it's a meme that is native to Great Britain, to Northwestern Europe, which we buried very deep, I think. And then what we did, because we couldn't find it, we imported these concepts such as chi and everything else, which are the same thing basically, but from the East. But to know that we've actually got our own native tradition and language around it, I think is, well, really helps, because it's somehow easier to resonate with something that's from your own land, somewhere else. And so part of it is like, we feel like this mission to reawaken the meme of Wyrd. So that hence the Wyrd Experience, which is where we've got all of the equipment. People can come in, and we've been working on, we got this little robot that works, so you can influence this robot moving around a table. We've now in the lab got a laptop with all the software and everything set up, so people can come in and interact with the programs there. And we nearly got the big machine ready to go, Murphy, as he's called. So we're hoping to have, you know, by October, November, to have Murphy the robot and the drum. So there's this drum that you can influence the rhythm of, to have those set up and running by November. And then another thing that we're doing is, so as I said, when they finished the work at Princeton, they set up this little company to produce some of the products for the public. But it was really, it was kind of run, they weren't really business, it wasn't really business focused. They were doing it a bit of as a hobby. And so it ended up, you know, there wasn't enough energy to keep it going, basically. And so we're starting up a new company that will develop these mind lamps, which we're kind of thinking of 3 versions. One is one you can interact with yourself. Another is going to be one that will sit in meeting rooms, and its glow will increase as the coherence and flow of the group.
Oh, I love that.
Room increases.
Oh, I love that.
And the other one we're thinking of is a twin lamp, where basically, if you know, you could have a lamp in your room there, and I could have a lamp here, and they would be twinned. And if I was thinking of you, your lamp would start to glow.
Oh, I love that too. That's gorgeous.
Have like lamps from different family members or loved ones or whatever. And if you think about that in COVID times, one of the biggest challenges was isolation, you know, people feeling alone, whereas we're not actually alone. That's the point. We're always connected to each other, but to have an affirmation of that, you know, with
how wonderful would it be as, you know, energy healers, to be able to know that as we're sending to our loved ones or whoever, that there could be a physical sign for that person to know that it's on its way and when it's arriving, because it lights up as well. There's so many different uses for all of that. And the meeting one, I was just envisaging that being in my house with my boys and having, they're all, you know, the teenagers, late teenagers going into the 20s, so to have some resonance in the room would be wonderful.
And we're either in flow, and you see it acts as a kind of, you know, we talk about biofeedback, these devices you put on your body and things. This is more a kind of socio-feedback, where you become consciously aware of when you are aligned as human beings in a group, and therefore when you're also going to be most creative, most effective together. And so when you're not, you
really
know,
showing connection, isn't it?
Yeah,
connection is
like,
key.
what are we doing now that's making it glow? You become more conscious of it, and oh, why did we just drop out of sync there? What happened? You know, so it brings a kind of whole learning to what it means to be aligned, you know, collectively as well. So I think that's going to be really cool. Yeah,
that's going to be very cool. I really love that idea. So Peter, thank you for all of that. Now there's two questions that I do ask everybody when they come on to the podcast, and the first one is, for anyone who is starting their working life, maybe for the first time, or maybe they've transitioned into something new or a different career, different job, what advice would you give them?
Well, it sounds kind of corny, but it really is this thing about following your heart, which is making sure you're in a place that feels like the right place to be, even if you don't understand why you're there. So it's like, you know, and the other thing is, if you've got a feeling of something you want to be doing or contributing, it's about uploading that wish or that desire, you know, that intention or a picture in your mind of you doing that work, and then just trusting that the universe will provide the pathway for you into that, and not trying to, you know, think that you know how that's going to unfold. So it's about kind of uploading the intention, as it were, and then letting it go and trusting and feeling grateful for the fact that you know it's going to happen, and then noticing, you know, things that come on along your path that might be taking you there. So that's I think that's the most important thing, is to get out of this more linear mindset where we feel we have to have like a whole plan of what we're going to do when and next, but learn to follow the signs and follow what feels right, even if your cognitive mind can't rationalize it. Because you'll discover why. And that becomes a much more joyous way of living life, and actually much more effective in the end as well.
I think it creates something even more, I'm going to use this word again, folks, beautiful than we could even possibly imagine, because what we think might be great is one thing, but as you experience it unfolding and becoming even more wonderful, because you've sort of let the petals unfold all on their own, what's underneath all that is a magical delight. I think it's wonderful. So thank you for that advice. And then the next question is, who would you like to hear on the Weird World of Knowing as a guest?
Brian Bates, if you can get hold of him.
Well, that'd be wonderful. That'd be great. Okay, I'll note that one down. And Brian, if you...
I would love to. Because I mean, we've had a bit of email contact, but he kind of, I think well, for whatever reasons anyway, but it would be great to have a conversation with him.
Oh gosh, it certainly would. Well, yes, who knows? You never know. We might have Peter Merry and Brian Bates on the same show, Weird World of Knowing, next. Let's put that one out into the ether and see what happens there. Peter, I can't thank you enough for being here and voicing everything and putting it into words and creating this really stunning environment for the scientists and conscious people to be able to come together and share the same space. It's creating something really magnificent. Thank you very much indeed. And if you've enjoyed this, everybody, you are able to get hold of Peter through the links below. But Peter, can you just let them know how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, best thing is probably to check out the website, petermerry.org. There's also a newsletter. So, you know, once a month, updates on any new stuff that I've written, any new things that are going on, including the latest developments around the Science and Consciousness event. So that's probably the best way. And from there, you can link to the Facebook or YouTube or any of the other channels. Yep.
Wonderful. Peter, thank you very much. And we'll see you all next week. Take care.
Thank you, Rachel. Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening on The Weird World of Knowing. I do hope you enjoyed your time with us. I'm Rachel Earing, your host. And gosh, I'm having a ball putting all of this together for you, so I hope you are too. And if you are, please do like, subscribe and share with those who might actually benefit from these weird moments of knowing as they realise how many of their own they've been having all their life. Take care and we'll see you next week.